Hello Summoners, and welcome back to another ProGuides upcoming changes video. My name is Dan, and today I'll be going over all the upcoming changes that are planned for patch 9.17. All the things we'll mention here can be found on the PBE right now or on the Riot dev boards, but please do keep in mind that nothing is set in stone and changes can be made before 9.17 hits the live servers. Also, there are a few notable changes which will target some of your favorite champions, like Yasuo, Akali, and Garen, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But before we get started, I want you to click the link below and check out ProGuides.com. ProGuides is the best way to increase your rank in League of Legends, and we post guide videos like this one every single day. As of now, we're currently uploading a Challenger gameplay analysis guide for every single champion, so don't miss out on this. On top of that, we have an exclusive feature called InstaPro, which provides instant 24/7 on-demand coaching from the best of the best. Your friends are going to be really surprised how you got so good at the game within such a short period of time. So with all that being said, let's jump right into it. Starting with the top lane, Aatrox. Despite being hit by a number of nerfs, including the removal of his revive, Aatrox has still been too strong and is receiving another nerf on patch 9.17. In the PBE right now, Aatrox will have his base HP lowered from 580 to 520. This is a huge nerf for Aatrox's early game and will definitely impact his stance as a top laner. Having 60 less HP at level 1 will mean that a lot of matchups in the top lane meta currently will become extremely difficult for Aatrox. This is the only change in the top lane, so let's move on to the jungle. Pantheon received a complete rework at the start of patch 9.16, but he was just a tad too weak in the jungle. However, he did receive a couple of hotfix buffs to his damage reduction against monsters, which did help Pantheon jungle out a bit. In patch 9.17, Pantheon is looking to receive a small buff on both his Q and E. His Q, Comet Spear's Tap, will now crit targets below 25% health. His E, Aegis Assault, will have its damage reduction against monsters completely removed. These changes are great for Pantheon, and it'll help him out in every lane he plays. There were a few changes for Kindred planned in 9.17, but they have been cancelled. So next up, we have the mid lane. Oh boy, here we go again. Akali received a mini rework a few patches ago and has held a decent stance in the meta ever since. However, due to her presence in competitive play, Akali is receiving a hard nerf in patch 9.17. Her Q, 5-point strike, will have its AP ratio reduced from 60% to 40%. This is a huge nerf to her core ability, which will affect her wave clear significantly. Before the buffs, Akali had a 50% AP ratio, which means that these nerfs will likely make her worse than she was before. Sorry Akali mains, but you're just not allowed to play League of Legends anymore. Speaking of not being able to play League of Legends, Galio will see a couple of buffs in patch 9.17. Ever since they gutted him from every lane by completely removing his taunt flash, Galio has been struggling a lot in the meta. On the PBE right now, Galio is looking to receive a buff on his Q, Winds of War, which will have its cooldown changed from 14 to 10 seconds to 12 to 10 seconds. Next up, his W, Shield of Durand, will have its minimum and maximum damage increased by a decent amount. It's hard to say if these changes are enough to bring Galio back into the meta, but we'll keep a close eye on him and update you in our patch rundown video next week. Although Qiyana hit the Rift with an abysmal win rate, it's pretty clear that she's a very powerful champion. Despite having her ultimate cooldown nerfed recently, it appears that she's still too strong and is looking to receive a few nerfs in patch 9.17. Her E, Audacity, will have its damage reduced from 70 to 210 to 50 to 190. Next up, her ultimate, Supreme Display of Talent, will have its cooldown nerfed again from 120 to 80 seconds to 120 flat at all ranks. These changes will definitely hurt her stance in the meta, but our analysts are predicting that she'll still be insanely powerful. Ryze received a mini rework not too long ago and has been struggling in the meta ever since. To help him out a bit, he'll receive a lot of love in patch 9.17. Firstly, his base MR will be increased from 30 to 34. Next, his E, Spellflux, will have its damage increased from 60 to 140 to 70 to 150. Although a 10 damage buff doesn't seem like all that much, keep in mind that this is one of his main wave clear abilities. In a meta where lane priority is so important, you'll definitely feel the 10 damage difference. There were some planned Yasuo buffs from 9.17, but thank God they got cancelled last minute. Moving on to AD carries. Kalista has been somewhat of a forgotten champion recently and has been in the dark for way too long. Historically, she's either the most broken champion in the game, or she's just completely useless like she is right now. For patch 9.17, her base AD will be increased by 2, followed by an increase to her base mana by 20. Lastly, her mana gain per level has been increased from 35 to 45. These changes are pretty minor, but any buffs to Kalista are welcome. Lucian has held a decent stance in the meta and is looking to receive a minor buff next patch. His base AD has been increased from 61 to 64. This will likely not affect his stance in the meta due to this being such a minor buff. However, it will become a bit easier for you to last hit with him during the early game. Finally, on to supports. Although the western regions haven't found as much success with Leona recently, the eastern regions have been dominating solo queue with her. In the Korean server, Leona is currently right behind Nautilus, Pyke, and Thresh on the tier list and is a very powerful pick in the right hands. For patch 9.17, Leona will receive a buff to her Q, Shield of Daybreak, which will have its cooldown lowered from 6 seconds to 5 seconds. Although this buff seems extremely minor, do not be fooled by this. Having the 1 second reduction is actually huge because it'll allow her to perma CC you. With 45% cooldown, she can lock you up with Q and then R and then E and then have her Q back up again. This is a 4-second CC combo, aka about 10% of a Morgana binding, so get those QSSs ready. Lastly, for sports, we have a change for Zyra. Zyra is receiving a few buffs in patch 9.17, which are focused around increasing her burst, mana costs, and cooldowns. Her ultimate, Stranglethorns, will have its damage increased from 180 to 350 to 180 to 380. On top of that, the mana cost of this ability has been reduced to 100 at all ranks, followed by a small cooldown buff. These changes are great for Zyra, and she'll likely be placed in our A tier next patch. Now let's go over some of the bigger changes for 4 champs on the PvE right now. First up, Nico will receive a gameplay update in the coming future, but these changes are not revealed yet. Make sure to click that subscribe button if you want to be notified when we make a video about these Nico changes. Next up, Garen is receiving a mini rework this patch, which will completely change the way he is played. Firstly, we will see a small buff to his attack speed per level, which will be increased from 2.9% to 3%. Next, his passive, Perseverance, will no longer double when he's below 25 to 50% HP. The cooldown of this ability has been changed from 9 to 4 seconds to 6 seconds at all ranks. On top of that, epic monsters will no longer break the passive, and the heal amount has been buffed by a tiny amount. His W, Courage, will see a small rework as well, and the resistances per stack has been lowered from 0.33 to 0.25, meaning that the cap is also lowered to 30 from 50. In addition, the minion kills to max stacks has been increased from 150 to 160. Garen's E, Judgment, will have the biggest change, and it'll have its ticks changed from 5+1 per 3 levels to 8+1 per 25% attack speed. The base damage on Judgment has been decreased during the early game, but buffed during the late game. The AD ratio will also be toned down a little bit during the early game, and the armor shred has been increased from 4 to 6. Lastly, this ability will no longer deal 33% bonus damage to isolated enemies, but will now deal 25% bonus damage, and apply on-hit effects to the nearest enemy. This means that Garen will now be hard countered by Ramesses or items like Thornmail. Lastly, his ultimate, Demacian Judgment, will have its villain passive completely removed. The damage has been changed to true damage to all targets, and the numbers have been nerfed by a significant amount. Overall, the changes do seem pretty good for Garen. Due to his new E, Garen can now take Conqueror, which makes him so much more powerful than before. On top of that, he now has an added layer of counterplay with items like Thornmail, which can single-handedly beat the champion. A lot of Garen mains are not liking these changes, but our analysts do believe that this is a step in the right direction. Next up, we have changes to Aurelian's Soul. First up, his passive, Center of the Universe, will have its damage ratio changed from 20 to 130 to 16 to 120. On top of that, the AP ratio has been changed as well to 25% flat at all levels from 18 to 35%. Next up, his Q, Star Surge, will have its cooldown changed from 10 seconds flat to 11 to 7 seconds, followed by a 10% increase to the bonus movement speed this ability grants. Also, a nice little change that Riot made to Star Surge is that the star will follow a soul if the missile speed is slower than his own speed. Aurelian Soul's W, Celestial Expansion, is receiving the biggest change. It will no longer be a toggle. His new W now causes a soul's stars to expand, gaining increased damage and rotating at a high but decaying speed. Upon reactivation of this ability, or after 3 seconds, the stars retract, granting 40% movement decaying over 1.5 seconds. The cooldown of this ability is 8 to 2 seconds, depending on the rank, and also costs a lot more mana. Lastly, his E, Comment of Legend, will have its passive movement speed completely removed. However, this is followed by a compensation buff to its range, which will now be increased from 3,000 to 7,000 to 5,500 to 7,500. On top of that, the speed at which he travels has been changed to scale depending on the rank of the ability. A lot of ASOL mains are not really liking these changes. Although they do seem like a fresh start for ASOL, his playstyle has been shifted too much, and he's no longer the DPS roam mage that everyone enjoys. Instead, he's more of a burst-oriented champion who does damage for a few seconds, then becomes useless for a few seconds. Lastly, we have a mini rework coming to Kayle. To start, her base armor has been increased from 26 to 29. Next, her passive, Divine Ascent, will now have its movement speed change from 15% towards champions to 8% in all directions. But the biggest change is that her ranged auto attacks have been moved to her first evolve, and the AoE auto attacks have been moved to her second evolve. This way, she can become relevant in the game as soon as she hits level 6. Kael's Q, Radiant Blast, will now refund 50% of its mana cost if it hits a champion, and the cast delay has been decreased by 0.25 seconds. The missile speed has also been decreased from 2000 to 1600, and the range was lowered to 900 from 950. Radiant Blast shred ratio has been decreased from 20% to 15%, and the duration has been increased by 1 second. Next up, Kael's E, Starfire Spellblade, will have its execute damage changed from 8 to 16% plus 1% per 100 AP to 8 to 12% plus 2% per 100 AP. On top of that, the AP ratio has been increased by 10%, and the AD ratio changed from total AD to bonus AD. Lastly, her ultimate Divine Judgment will have its mana cost lowered from 100 at all ranks to 100 to 0. On top of that, the AoE radius has been increased by 25. Unlike the ASOL changes, a lot of Kael mains are loving this update because it makes you feel more impactful in the game much earlier. Alright, that's it for our upcoming changes video for patch 9.17. Let us know which change you're most excited about in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed watching this video and you want to see more, then please hit that sub button. Also, make sure to check out ProGuides.com using the link below if you want to see huge improvements to your rank. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you out on the Rift.